The Ice Age is coming. While everyone is struggling to survive, our MC is making the frozen frontiers his very own kingdom with his mysterious powers. In the middle of an unrecognizable frozen city where every infrastructure has been completely shut down, every mode of transportation at a standstill, an urgent report is coming in that the Earth has finally entered a new ice age at a rapid pace. The brave correspondent braced the cold as hard as he could, his microphone freezing over with every passing second, as he informed everyone that global temperatures would continue to drop even more with no signs of stopping. But he urges the public not to give up hope. Balling his fist, he projected confidence that the government had not forgotten about its citizens in these tough times. That as long as they stand together, the people of this strong nation will overcome this daunting crisis. Just as he was about to spiel more unity propaganda to quell the masses, a whole-ass frozen airplane made a crash landing in the middle of the city, plowing through the reporter and his whole crew. A man watched this final shot of the last news broadcast covered by the remaining TV station in the country. He watched it on a miserably frozen screen. After that plane crash landed on top of the remaining news network team, the TV finally cut into static. No more overcast news coverage of what's happening outside. The room of our protagonist, Han Feng, painted a picture of someone who tried to fight, but finally gave up. He did not even bother cleaning up the mess of what little supplies he had left. The area around his entrance is filled with boxes of useless stuff and dwindling provisions. Outside, someone had been knocking quite hard and calling his name in a panic. Finally hearing the incessant calling of his name, Han Feng stood up from his filthy, frozen apartment, took a steel bat modified with some nails, traces of blood still visible on its surface, and walked towards the door. Han Feng was gaunt. He had the combination of the thickest possible winter wear, but it was not enough to stave off the cold. He slowly and carefully peeked at the peephole to see who was on the other side of the door. Who he saw shocked him. It also excited him a little bit. It was a woman he was very familiar with before the Ice Age even kicked in. She also had her thickest winter wear on, but standing outside, exposed to the elements, made her face red and her body shiver uncontrollably. Han Feng opened the door with a slight flush on his face. The woman's name is Hyona, and he has no idea what she is doing outside of his door. Still holding the bat, he urged her to come inside where it was warmer and safer. These days, the outside world has turned into a dangerous, lawless land. Hyona swung the door open wider to enter Han Feng's relatively safer room. The next thing you know, she was already grabbing him by the collar and pushing her lips onto his. Her little bonnet even fell with how fast she moved. Han Feng was surprised, but he did not pull back, and his cheeks got even redder. This deep and passionate kiss went on for way too long, if you ask me. But let our boy get some of that sloppy kiss action in the middle of an abandoned hallway outside his home. When they separated, both Han Feng and Hyona were breathing heavily, their tongues still out, spit still dribbling. The world is ending, and this is what they're doing? Totally understandable. Realizing what just happened, Han Feng pulled back and asked what had gotten into this woman that she would just grab him and kiss him the second he opened the door. Still trying to catch her breath, she confessed that she had a realization that Han Feng was the man that she truly loved all this time. Tears were starting to form in the corner of her expressive eyes while telling him that he was the one she was supposed to be with all along. It takes a crisis to see someone's true colors, to see who really cares for you. Who will be there for you no matter how hard things get. Speaking of hard, Hyona wanted to prove that what she was saying was the truth by taking Han Feng's hands and putting them against her chest to feel how fast her heart was beating. She promised that she would be willing to do anything just so they could be together now. Hearing the word anything wiped out any semblance of rationality in our boy's brain. All the red flags turned green. To finally seal the deal, Hyona started pressing her thighs against Han Feng's flagpole while grinding and pulling him closer. He did not stand a chance at all. The world might be encased in ice and supplies might be low, but he was heating up like never before, and something was rising in the lower regions. Han Feng looked at Hyona directly in her eyes as she caressed his cheeks tenderly. He confessed that those words she just said meant the world to him. However, the doorframe is not the right place for them to continue this. Hyona gently shushed him so he would not say another word. All she wants right now is for Han Feng to close his eyes and feel the moment. Against his logical mind, Han Feng did what she asked. Now that his eyes were closed, he asked what was supposed to happen next. Well, that's when another guy comes in, gripping the door ominously. This mystery guy swung the frozen door wide open, locked onto Han Feng's head, and smashed a blunt weapon with killing intent. Poor Han Feng did not see it coming. His skull was crushed while his eyes were closed. It was a bloody and brutal mess. A cruel sneak attack splattered blood all over the apartment entrance. Hyona and the mystery man entered the apartment. She shivered and stuttered, seemingly shocked that her partner in crime would actually kill Han Feng. The man scoffed and told her to stop playing innocent, for she knew that this was the only way this encounter could go. The world went to hell a long time ago. One less mouth to feed is not going to change anything. Enough about dwelling on the brutal attack. It's time to see what this Hanfeng chump has been hoarding. If they play their cards right, they might even get enough supplies to survive until rescue comes. The messed up part was that Hanfeng did not die immediately. He lay down on the freezing cold ground, trembling in agony while all the blood that spilled from his head wound froze as soon as it got out. He was not really clear as to what happened, but he could not move. Maybe it has come. Perhaps he was finally dying. He can finally know what it feels like to lose his life. The last thing he saw was the mystery man and that evil witch, Hyona, flirting a few meters away from his limp body. He's been touching her in places he could only dream of as he promises to reward her for her best actress performance that made the whole operation possible. As Hanfeng's eyes closed for good, the hatred he felt for that cold-hearted felt unbearably heavy. He swore that if there was a next life, he would never let himself be a lovesick puppy again. In the empty darkness that he was plunged into, Hanfeng started seeing little droplets of light. It started from a little speck that started growing into something bigger and more substantial. As it got even brighter, Hanfeng started questioning what the hell was happening. He subconsciously extended his arm. His skin was translucent, like it was an entirely different entity. The warm light attracted him after suffering through the endless cold of the real world. May this be the path to heaven, but the golden light suddenly changed its color to red. Now, what kind of heaven has this crimson color? After being baited by the golden light and trying to reach out for it, Hanfeng, or at least an abstract construct of his body, felt his limbs getting shredded like he was being put through a meat grinder. Nothing goes well for this man. It did not take too long for the crimson light to cover his entire body as he let out a miserable scream of agony. His translucent frame disintegrates piece by piece. The dark nothingness was filled with his scattered essence, and Hanfeng was gone. Still feeling the pain of getting ground and deconstructed atom by atom, he woke up in a cold sweat, screaming for his life. The pain was way too real. He was seduced into closing his eyes, bonked in the head for being too horny, died a depressing death, woke up in an empty void, got tricked into being torn from an atomic level, and now he doesn't know where he is. He looked around, and the sun shone bright through his balcony. His soft and comfortable bed was nice and clean. The air felt fresh as it lifted his curtains up. Hanfeng was far from the cruel world he had gotten used to. It took him 30 minutes to absorb the wild things that had happened to him over the past few hours. He spent those 30 minutes reveling in the perfect view of the residential area overlooking his apartment. Hanfeng could not get over the fact that the sun was shining again. He missed its warmth and its light. He thought that he would never feel this type of comfort and warmth ever again. He just checked the date, and it seems to be that it's the morning of June 28th. As far as he could remember, the Ice Age apocalypse will start on July 15th. He was supposed to die after being ambushed, but he was somehow brought back in time half a month before the end of civilization. In other words, he has been reborn and given the ultimate second chance. Aside from the memories he retained from the previous timeline, there is something different this time. Something strange was happening inside his body, and it might have manifested in his hands. Ever since he woke up, there's been a red glow wrapped around his right hand the whole time. He tried wiping it off, waving it away, but nothing made it disappear. It doesn't hurt. It just feels warm. It did not seem to do anything else aside from the light, and he thought that he was just imagining things at first. Hanfeng must have stayed so long pondering what was happening on his balcony that he started sneezing. As he wiped his nose of the mess, he noticed that the red glow in his right hand had mysteriously turned to a green one. Then something happened that made him panic. The hand that was wrapped around by the green glow started getting bigger, growing in length as if his bones, flesh, and skin were stretching out. Anyone will freak out if they see their hands doing that. Afraid and confused, Hanfeng stormed into his room and slammed the balcony door shut as fast as he could. He managed to make it inside before anything more drastic happened. He was huffing and puffing for air, but the hand seemed to have turned back to normal. The green glow was still there, though, lingering and seemingly inexhaustible. Hanfeng looked at it helplessly. There were beams of light shooting out of his hand. How would modern science even justify or explain a mysterious phenomenon like this? After the lengthening incident outside, now it's shrinking very slowly. The green light seems to be an erratic thing. It shrinks and grows unpredictably, not like the stationary red one at all. But that's still a mystery too. Sitting down on his couch, Hanfeng suddenly felt a pang of unbearable exhaustion. He hasn't done much aside from running back inside, but he feels drained. This might be connected to the green light. Frustrated, he started swinging his arms all over the place, trying to get a semblance of a clue as to what this really was. Then it hit him. Isn't this just like those manhwa stories that he loves to read? He immediately sprinted to the kitchen and grabbed his sharpest knife. In those manhwas that he loves, the protagonist always starts their stories by being reborn. Just like them, maybe he will gain cheat-like powers. He wanted to test this out by grabbing the coolest thing he could imagine and posing with it. After a few minutes of waiting for something to happen, anything to change, Han Feng just scratched his head in shame as the sharp knife did not react with the light in his hand at all. He was so busy trying to find out if he had some fantastic, cheat-like powers that he neglected his exhaustion and the rumbling of his stomach. He's just starving at this point. Unfortunately for him, the Han Feng of the past, who's clueless about the coming apocalypse, is a lazy bastard who does not even have a single piece of edible food in his fridge. This was getting bad. He had never felt so hungry before. If he does not eat something soon, he will most probably pass out at any second now. He turned his attention towards the living room, where a clear jar of soybean snacks was just sitting quietly. These roasted soybeans were just some leftover snacks he got before the apocalypse. It's not exactly a complete and filling meal, but it will have to do for now. It should tide the hunger before he hits up the supermarket later. He grabbed one of the roasted soybeans, unconsciously using his right hand, momentarily forgetting that it had the mysterious green light wrapped around it. Han Feng was too hungry to think of anything else. So, he tossed the soybean right into his mouth, hoping to get some type of food into his system. As soon as the bean hit his tongue, a smoky explosion occurred right in his face. The fog it created almost covered his entire upper body. Much to his surprise, he was now munching on a beanstalk. It looked as though the roasted soybean had sprouted inside his mouth. He could feel the roots on his tongue, and the stalk itself extended outward. He pulled it out, and the plant left an earthy taste in his mouth. Out of all the bizarre events he's been going through lately, this might be near the top. He was just about to snack on some roasted soybeans, and now this happens. Moreover, he does not feel tired anymore. It seems like that explosion on his face erased the hungry sensation he was feeling. Looking down at his right hand, the green light has vanished too. Maybe all of this has something to do with what happened to the soybean. He plucked one of the pods in the stalk and examined it carefully. Opening the luscious green pod, he confirmed that it was just an ordinary fresh bean sprout. Maybe this is the power that he was daydreaming about. No matter what, this is undoubtedly an incredible discovery that should be studied more. Still, he can't really research anything while worrying about dying of hunger at any moment. Right now, he has a bigger fish to fry in the form of stocking up on supplies before the end of the world, as everyone knows. For the first time in a long time, Han Feng could walk out of his apartment to feel the sun on his skin and hear the birds sing. He could walk amongst the bustling crowd of people in the commercial district, minding their own business instead of holing up in their homes, fearing the cold. Han Feng was in deep thought as he walked to his destination. Let's get this straight. First, the red glow around his hand has turned to green. The green light shrinks and grows his limbs, making his heart beat faster and super tired. When he touched the soybean snacks, it sprouted into a whole stalk. Looking at his right hand with more questions than answers, he wonders just what kind of power has been bestowed upon him by who knows who. He continued his contemplative walks casually until he heard a familiar, sweet voice calling his name that would have melted him before, but would make his blood boil now. Han Feng did not realize it right away, and turned around to see who was calling him by name. It was that evil witch that got him brutally killed, Lee Hyuna. She flashed her wide smile. Her makeup was on point, hiding her rotten personality. She asked if Han Feng was out shopping too. She even employed her expert witch tricks, appearing as pretty as humanly possible while commenting about how it's like fate that they ran into each other in this place. Han Feng hasn't really had the chance to digest everything that has happened yet. But seeing Lee Hyuna out in the wild is starting to bring back the bitterness he held onto until his final breath. Lee Hyuna used to be the goddess of his dreams for 3 long years. He was a simp that did everything in his power to make her happy. He did all that, knowing full well that he was nothing but just another fallback guy in the friend zone. No, he wasn't even in the friend zone. He was just a piggy bank. For all those years of devoting himself and his wallet to the wrong girl, he never would have thought that she would be the one that would get him killed. Before he could go out of control, Han Feng pinched himself to stay grounded and calm. It took every bit of his willpower to do so. Thinking rationally now is not the time to take his revenge. Not yet, at least. First, he needs to take care of the supply problem unless he wants to be miserable and hungry in the Ice Age again. Lee Hyuna walked closer and waved her hand around his eyes while asking what he was spacing out for. This has never happened before. It used to be that just hearing her voice would make the poor sap swoon. Han Feng swallowed his hatred for the witch and faked a smile as he apologized for being speechless and for how especially beautiful she looked today. She was just so radiant that he got a bit lost in the moment. Now that's more like it. Lee Hyuna coyly laughed and asked when he got so smooth with his lines like that. Her lips lifted to a slight and confident smirk, thinking that he got this boy eating at the palm of her hands. So, she went for the heart kill shot with the most adorable pose in her arsenal. Lee Hyona invited Han Feng to go shopping together, but they had run into each other anyway. Now, there is a limit to how much time Han Feng could face her without losing control of his rage. So, he just walked on and apologized that they wouldn't be doing any shopping together today. Lee Hyona was stunned. This was not how it was supposed to go down. She was supposed to get some free stuff from a pathetic simp. While walking in the other direction, Han Feng couldn't help but praise the girl's technique. But he won't fall for it. He won't be used as a personal ATM again. He's not that foolish anymore. So, he went straight to the spot where he could get everything he needed. Waldemar Shopping Plaza. This Waldemar in A City is the most extensive and most well-stocked supermarket in the eastern region. It's like Walmart, but that brand's copyrighted. Of course, when the Ice Age hits, this place will be cleaned out overnight. Back in the previous timeline, nobody ever found out just who did it and how. Han Feng had already started his shopping spree and filled up one cart with goods. He needs to stock up as much as possible before society crumbles under the sheer cold. He consulted some internet forums about some generic apocalypse survival guide, and it was surprisingly helpful. Scrolling through, he listed down the things he'd need, like food, winter clothes, medicine, daily necessities, fuel, tools, transportation, and even weapons. There's a lot to prepare, but he was so pumped to get some supplies that he forgot to take the more significant problem at hand. His personal wallet's current balance was a measly 15,000 yuan, equivalent to a little more than 2,000 USD. How was he supposed to secure a safe and comfortable life in the icy apocalypse with only this much? He's going to need a lot more cash for everything that he will need. At that moment, a message notification popped up on his phone. A notification that might be heaven's way of telling him to calm down. The message came from an organization called Money Jar Loans, congratulating him on his approved eligibility to take out a loan up to 168,000 yuan, or a little more than 23,000 USD. A light bulb dinged inside his mind. There was no need to panic when it came to funds. How could he forget that the convenience of technology had brought him an infinite money glitch? There are dozens of money lending apps that require minimal requirements to get a loan approved for those who are desperate for cash. They're incredibly predatory, but burying himself in debt doesn't matter, as he won't have to pay them back after the apocalypse goes into full swing. Out in the commercial district, some lady was angrily kicking an empty soda can on the curb. She's obviously upset about something. It turned out to be Lee Hyona. She looks like she is not in the best mood at all. Her eyes were full of toxic vitriol as today, one of her many simps dared to refuse to take her shopping when she got all dolled up to get spoiled. She was seriously pissed off that Han Feng would just take off like that without letting her deplete his bank account like a worthless leech. She started insulting the guy in her mind for being a pathetic loser who doesn't even own a car. Lee Hyona vowed never to be nice to that simp again. Her angry walk was interrupted by some loud honking coming from the car coming up on the road. Curious, she turned around to see what's up. It looked like a brand new truck straight out of the dealership. It was still shiny and premium looking. Han Feng was lowering the windows in the driver's seat. He just pulled up to greet Hyona as he just happened to pass her by while she was doing a walk of shame along the commercial district. Seeing the new wheels, Hyona's vow to never be nice to Han Feng again has seemingly melted out of her mind. All she saw were brand new leather seats and the smell of cash. Han Feng hopped off. When asked if the car was his, he answered affirmatively, adding that he just got it earlier. She came up to the witch and made up some story about how his dad has been killing it in the United States, business-wise, so he got some cash to blow. He even added that he just got out of the airport after dropping off his old man. Lee Hyona's face lit up. The only thing that could make that happen would be the possibility of striking it rich. So, she took a deep breath and put her game face on for Han Feng. This is the second time that she's doing this today. She looked to the ground and started trembling lightly. Knowing that Han Feng took his wealthy father to the airport today, she began apologizing for asking him to go shopping without knowing that he'd have a busy schedule. Then the waterworks came down. She started summoning those tears at the perfect time while meekly telling Han Feng that he was so cold to her earlier. She thought he was ditching a good friend. Han Feng smiled with satisfaction. This Academy-worthy acting would have worked wonders with the previous him, but things are different now. He could see through it all. This silly girl was a pro. He did not hesitate to hold her by the waist, pulling her closer. His other hand took hold of her chin, and they looked each other in the eye. Lee Hyona was taken aback by the fact that one of her simps was so confidently forward. Han Feng put on an acting masterclass himself, promising to never ditch her as she's way too important for him to do such a cruel thing. For a split second, there was an imperceptible twisted smile on her face. but she quickly wiped it off. Continuing with her sincere, sweet girl act, she brought out the big guns. Lee Hyuna admitted that Han Feng's pretty special in her life too. She even invited him to have lunch and watch a movie today so she could get to know him better. Just as she was about to ask for his answer, Han Feng was already gone like the wind. It was the perfect, unnoticeable escape. Hyuna was speechless. Her heartfelt confession was actually directed towards nothing but air. Han Feng was already tinkering with the piles of boxes in the back of his truck. He was playfully complaining about how he still has to carry so many things and how busy his schedule is. Clearly infuriated that her attack did not land, Lee Hyuna tried her best to keep her sweet girl composure as she asked why he bought so much stuff. He replied that this much is nothing special. He just grabbed some things he likes. To torment the witch even further, Han Feng lied through his teeth and enthusiastically told her that he got a present for the lady too. Not wanting to overplay her hand, Lee Hyuna waved goodbye as she walked in the direction of her home. She smiled and said that she was looking forward to that gift. As soon as she turned her back towards Han Feng, her supposed biggest simp, a sly smile appeared on her lips, proud of how she dealt with her piggy bank. On the other hand, Han Feng was just having fun messing with the witch. Knowing this woman, he knew that he couldn't let her find out about his little stockpile of supplies. All this stuff will be his ticket to surviving the apocalypse, after all. Lee Hyuna will just have to wait for her turn. Once the world ends, Han Feng will make sure that she gets what's coming to her. That mystery guy who bashed him on the head too. His anxiety about the incoming inevitable collapse of society is starting to melt. Han Feng is actually starting to look forward to what's coming now. The next day came, June 29th. Again, July 15th will be D-Day. It will be the beginning of the end. First comes the heavy snow, then the temperature will drastically plummet down to negative 20 degrees Celsius at an alarming rate. Over the next month after that, temperatures will continue to gradually drop day by day, reaching lows of up to negative 70 degrees Celsius. At that point, the world would be encased in ice and snow completely, making it almost impossible to go outside. The first thing that Han Feng secured was his bountiful food supplies. Aside from the sheer volume of stock, he also needs everything packed and sealed securely. He can't let the neighbors sense that something's going on. They can't suspect that he's hoarding copious amounts of food. This was tiring work. Some of the sensitive supplies had to be moved at night when no one was around. Han Feng doesn't trust anyone enough to help, so he has to do it on his own. Once the apocalyptic ice age starts, the power grid will be extremely unstable. That's where his newest purchase shines. A heavy-duty generator plus enough fuel to keep it running for a whole year at the very least. With power secured, he now has to consider the fatal consequence of the building's heating system stopping. He had to call in some specialized contractors to modify his home for independent heating. Han Feng also ordered some reinforced doors and windows while he was at it. He needed a dedicated room to store all the supplies that he had hoarded, so he used an empty bedroom for all the essentials. By the time he finished preparing everything listed in his little notebook of survival, it was already July 14th. Just one more day before the temperature plummets and everything descends to chaos. Next up on his list is the main event that he's been postponing out of uncertainty all this time. It is time to buckle down and actually study his mysterious ability. Han Feng made a home-cooked meal for dinner while pondering his survival in the incoming Ice Age apocalypse. When things get hard, relying solely on the supplies he has accumulated won't be enough. But he has a possible answer to this problem. His power to manipulate plants in some mystical way might be his only hope for a sustainable future. The meal he cooked featured soybeans as its main ingredient. That's right, the same beans he conjured from a single roasted snack using his ability. He racked his brain and tried so many gestures and possible triggers, but the lights hadn't come out yet. The activation is so random that finding the right trigger is nearly impossible. For now, it is time for a risky taste test. He needs to make sure the food conjured by his abilities is edible. Who knew that trying some beans would be so nerve-wracking? Han Feng got through half the plate of his beans with no apparent problems at all. Even the soy milk passed the taste and safety test. While chewing on his lunch, the confirmation that his ability could provide edible food was game-changing. At least this proved that he has the ability to theoretically spawn food. The next step is the harder and more trial-and-error-based one. He needs to figure out how to actually use the red and green lights and make them appear according to his will. So far, he has only tried it on soybeans, but what would happen if he could use it on other things? Opening his newly stocked fridge, Han Feng steeled his resolve to experiment and see if his ability would work with other plants too. The testing period stretched from midday until the sun was about to set. Han Feng did not know that as he passed out in the middle of experimentation. As he slowly opened his eyes, he noticed that he was gripping something tightly in his right hand. A green vegetable of some kind. A massive broccoli. Slowly getting up from the floor, He could not be bothered by the absolute mess that was in his kitchen, as the pain in his head was hellish. It felt like something was pounding from inside his skull. He has to take note of this sensation in the future. This power of his takes a severe toll on the mind and the body, and it cannot be used without restrictions unless he wants to pass out and wake up with a migraine every day. After getting up, he immediately got a spoonful of his beans to refuel again. He might have pushed himself to the limit today, but at least he learned something vital about this mysterious ability of his. A few hours ago, before he blacked out, he neatly arranged a diverse selection of produce on the kitchen floor. He tried using his power on a bunch of them after he managed to activate the green light. Some root crops like potatoes did not react to his green light at all for some unknown reason. But not all of them were duds. Some of the crops grew from the seeds into full-blown plants like the soybean stalks. Wheat was one of those. And some neither stayed the same nor grew into full-blown crops. They just exploded in his hands like mini-bombs. It was a frightening experience that caught Han Feng off guard. After those explosions, the plants would turn into a substance that looked like coal but was very light. This development was certainly outside of his expectations. Thankfully, he could find some decent use for these inedible black substances. They are used to heat the space like coal when put together in a container and lit up. Coming from a future where heat was a luxury, Han Feng would gladly take these little balls of warmth. No more worrying about staying warm in the future. After a bunch of explosions, he tried many more times and failed most of them. He just kept chucking those black balls into the bucket one by one. When he got into some seeds he chose to take a more meditative stance while forcing himself to focus on controlling his breathing. After a few minutes of intense concentration that left him sweating bullets, he finally got the most significant success in this experiment. A gigantic broccoli shockingly appeared in his grasp. Before his eyes gave out and his consciousness went lights off, he remarked that the success rate of this method was still way too random. Then his body hit the floor. Thankfully, he was sitting on the tiles already, so the fall wasn't too bad. Now he's awake, and his belly is full of beans. He played around with the broccoli while thinking long and hard and still failing to find any patterns to this ability. But he can't give up. There has to be some kind of principle behind how this ability works. There are still too many unknowns, but he made some decent progress today. At least now he has some understanding of the activating conditions of the lights. Who would have thought that the key to activating the bizarre skill lies in his very own consciousness? All he has to do is enter a meditative trance. His method involves imagining himself out in nature in his bare form, free from the constraints of human civilization. In other words, buck naked. In his mind palace, he walks on the ground with bare feet, his soles making direct contact with the soil where life grows. Sunlight kisses his skin as all life around him harmonizes. Just like Adam in the Garden of Eden, his body and mind are both part of the natural world, a peaceful resonance of all that has life. Once he enters that state of mind, he slowly opens his eyes and a familiar green glow appears once again. This ability of his is directly connected to his consciousness. Working from that concept, he could freely call on the green light. Now that he's done with all the plant samples with a low success rate, it's time to move on to a different type of specimen. The target of the second experiment would be all kinds of meats this time around. So he slowly brought his right hand wrapped with the green light towards a juicy slab of meat. He already half expected it, but it's still disappointing that there were no reactions at all. Maybe the green light only works on plants. Thinking that the gentle approach might not be effective, Han Feng grabbed his meat and squeezed hard while praying that his right hand would work its magic. After a few minutes, he had to accept that nothing would happen. You could see the defeat and dejection in his tired eyes. That was when he thought of the sensation he felt while meditating. In a trance, he could sense two distinct colors, the red and green lights. Throughout the experiments, he hasn't tried using the red one yet. Grasping the primary trigger function of his ability, he only has to concentrate on bringing that red light out of his consciousness. While still holding the meat, he closed his eyes and tried to reach for the other ability lying dormant inside his system. After a little while, a spark of red light finally made an appearance on his right hand. With that initial spark, the glow swiftly wrapped around his hand. Surprisingly, it also wrapped around the piece of meat. It looked like it was creating some sort of bubbling reaction at the meat's surface. A few seconds of intense concentration later, Han Feng opened his eyes to a putrid pile of hardened dark red sludge that looked like it came right out of hell as the red light subsided. He immediately threw that vile thing on the ground out of sheer disgust. You would undoubtedly do that too, in his position. Realizing that this disfigured sludge might provide some valuable insights, Han Feng crouched on the ground to observe it. He poked the thing, and it was a little squishy. So this is how meats would react to the red light. It might look revolting, but the texture and overall feel point towards the possibility that the meat got cooked or something. Was this really all the red light can do? Heat things up? Stoves and pans could do the same thing, and they could produce more appetizing meals than whatever the hell this is. Han Feng refuses to believe that's all there is to it. Upon using his consciousness to trigger his abilities a fair bit amount, he could understand his capabilities on a deeper level. If he were to describe the red light sensation, it would be like a disintegration process. His next meat experiment looked a lot better than the first one. But if that's the case, understanding the underlying concepts of these two lights might be easier than he initially thought. He grabbed a bunch of soybeans from his bean pile and gripped them hard in his right hand. In his left hand was the red light and the cooked up meat. If the green light represents the evolution of matter, then the red light is the opposite, which would be disintegration. Since he's already testing out some confusing concepts, what would happen if he combined the green light grasping beans and the red light grasping meat? The result was an even bigger reaction than he was expecting. The combination produced a bright, blinding light between his hands. When the lights died down, it was revealed that his meat got a lot bigger as a result. The meat had been supersized, but where did the soybeans in his right hand go? Could it be that the two subjects merged together, producing this giant slab? Han Feng meticulously inspected the big meat. No matter how you look at it, it's undeniably incredible. It looks, feels, and smells exactly like real meat, but even fresher somehow. Gaining some confidence that he's getting a lot better at this superpower thing, he decided to go for some more experiments. After a few hours, he was back to square one once again. His kitchen floor was filled with charred remains of meat and crops. He frustratedly threw a tantrum, and everything he tried failed miserably. Getting all that exasperation out of his system, Han Feng sat up and took a deep breath. He'll just pause the experiments for now. He can always just take his time to figure out its deeper intricacies later. Anyway, today was still a productive one, even though he ended it on a bitter and charred note. Han Feng can already see the future if he can just successfully master this mysterious power. There's no doubt about it. With infinite resources, he would be the man standing at the pinnacle of this post-apocalyptic world. It's his dream, so he could put some sweet muscles in his image. Speaking of power, he might have forgotten one of the most important aspects of survival. Food alone is not going to cut it in the coming days. He will be completely vulnerable with all this loot if he doesn't have a decent weapon to defend himself. He swiftly took the various crops littered around his floor. He has to hurry and find himself a weapon before the temperature goes on a nosedive. Looking out the window, it seems like the initial stages of the apocalypse have already started. Snow is beginning to fall from the skies. It's here. The public might think this is just a typical snowy evening, but it's not. Just like the previous timeline, it really is happening. The collapse of modern civilization is commencing. Heading outside, Han Feng fears that the temperatures will drop to 45 below within the week. He needs a gun, and fast. But buying a gun in this country is illegal, and he doesn't exactly have any connections to the criminal world. That's when he overheard a scandalous man yelling and boasting that he's a construction guy with millions riding on every project. The dude was bragging to a passerby that he knows the infamous Lao Wang from the Shigang Lida group. They're so close. They're practically brothers. Han Feng thinks he's seen this thug before. A dumbass with an exaggerated fashion style, blinged out with jewelry of questionable authenticity and over-the-top streetwear. A guy who offers everyone cigarettes for some reason. Around this area, people refer to this bleached-haired, cigarette-loving thug as Homeless Joe. Homeless Joe's real name is Li Ziyi. He likes it when people call him Brother Li, and he lives in Han Feng's neighborhood. He's reputed to be in charge of contracting projects and knows everyone around the area. If you offer him some cigs, he won't accept any other brands as he only smokes Huazi. Other brands make him cough. He's always helping his big brother with projects and looks forward to going to saunas. In reality, this bum does not have a proper job, but he always acts so busy. You often see him walking around while on a call, shouting out deals worth 20 million or 10 million as if he wants everyone to hear how successful he is. The guy is a deadbeat, but Han Feng can see that maybe Homeless Joe has the necessary connections to get what he so badly needs. So, he approached the thug, referring to him as Brother Li and saying that it's been a long time since they have seen each other. Han Feng waved with an awkward smile as he was uncertain how this guy would respond. Brother Li annoyedly asked if they knew each other as he walked closer. Being younger than Li, he introduced himself as Xiao Han, kind of like saying little bro. He swore that they'd met a while ago, so I must have forgotten. The thug complained that he's been swamped with work lately, so he can't be blamed for his bad memory. But he was pretty receptive to talk. Han Feng was being overly cautious as he was about to ask for something very illegal. He surveyed the area, looking from left to right to make sure that no one could hear what he was about to say. Then, he came up to Brother Li and directly asked for the weapon that he needed to defend himself in the coming days. Li jumped in fright and asked what he would need a gun for. That's not a good sign. Feeling like a guilty criminal, Han Feng still had to push through this as he couldn't think of anyone else who could help him with his problem. Lee started speaking seriously, wanting to clear something up before they got any further. He insisted that his organization does not engage in any illegal activities and that guns are serious business. He hinted that he had the connections for it, but he was not one to mix ordinary people up with something dangerous. Han Feng pushed the thug's questionable Louis Vuitton bag out of his face and insisted that Brother Lee got it all twisted. He was just inquiring about some firearms for self-defense, as he has been involved in some nasty personal grudge. And so, Han Feng started lying his ass off with a story that he was making up as he spoke. According to him, one day while riding his bike to work like usual, he ran into an old man who was just spitting everywhere on the bike line. It was so gross, and to make matters worse, the wind carried one of those disgusting globs of spit right into Han Feng's face when he was just minding his own business. Angered by the revolting old man, Han Feng threw his bike to the side and confronted the old man. What did the bastard do, you ask? The asshole decided to spit on him again while he was airing out his grievance. He could not take it anymore and brought down some street justice on the disgusting old man. He gave the guy a good old beating in the middle of the road, with everyone watching on the sidelines. As the old man left with his clothes tattered and his face messed up, the bastard swore that he would get back at Han Feng for this humiliation. The very next day, that old man was patched up and waiting for Han Feng on the usual bike route. This time, he had some goons with him. They beat Han Feng up quite badly and threatened to do it again if they ever saw him anywhere. His clothes were a mess, his face was bruised, and his body was wounded. He has never been so humiliated in his life. That is why he wants a weapon for self-defense. That's the long and short version of it. That's the story he could come up with on the spot. And it looks like it was a very effective one. Brother Lee was fuming in anger as he imagined the nasty old jerk spitting on the road and hitting Han Feng. Such uncivilized behavior should not be tolerated. That's not really the point of Han Feng's story, but at least he's getting somewhere. Brother Lee tapped his shoulders and assured him that this vendetta would be taken care of. He assured Han Feng that he's got our boy covered. He will just make a call to his big brother right now and they'll fetch that gun. Han Feng was starting to doubt if he made the right decision in approaching this guy. With all that tough talk, Brother Lee invited him to go to the station and hop on the bus with him. His excuse was that his Panamera was being serviced in the shop, so he couldn't drive to the headquarters. Han Feng assured him that transportation wouldn't be a problem. He has his car parked right to the side, after all. The brand new vehicle immediately caught the eye of this hype beast bum. On the drive over to his big brother, Lee could not stop going on and on about how Han Feng is living the good life and asked how much this new ride costs. It was about 700,000 of borrowed money. As he casually gave directions to turn left at the next intersection to reach the alleged office, Brother Lee kept on snapping pics of himself sitting in the new leather seats. His social media handle was Handsome Spicy Guy, and tonight's post was a picture of his dumbass face with a caption complaining about how his SUV's seat is still too hard to sit in on account of it being new. They pulled up to one of the seedier parts of the city. Some tough-looking guys were camped outside, complaining about the messed up weather. You can't blame them, though. It went straight from summer to hardcore winter overnight. Seeing some crisp-looking wheels pull up, everyone turned to whoever was about to exit that car. Seeing that it was Lee Z, they flocked towards him to ask what was up. Brother Lee just told them that he had some stuff to handle with Boss Liu. The other thugs assumed that the new Tiger SUV belonged to Lee and started hassling him about the price tag. Lee did not deny it at all. He even proudly boasted that he had spent 700 grand for the car. Han Feng was not upset though. Bragging that you own the car so confidently while the actual owner is standing nearby is kind of a goated, shameless move. As soon as they entered the establishment, the one known as Boss Liu, a hardcore gangster-looking man, came out upset that Big Mouth Lee would disturb him so late in the evening. Brother Lee visibly turned a lot more reserved in front of the boss, even offering his cigs politely. The big guy does not have time for any of that filler nonsense, though. He's a busy man. Brother Lee introduced their little brother, Han Feng, as a buyer of something special. A gun. Boss Liu wanted to confirm if he heard that correctly. As soon as the big boss looked him over, Han Feng froze up in fear. He wasn't sure what would happen if he made the wrong move or said the wrong thing. Boss Liu just stared at him silently, cigarette in mouth, seemingly scrutinizing him from head to toe. Then the big guy cracked a smile. He was quite disappointed that Han Feng only needed a lousy gun when he was expecting something more interesting. He gestured towards one of his henchmen, Cheng Zi. The henchman already knew what to do and rummaged through his jacket pocket. He tossed a pistol on the table and Boss Liu quoted a price. 6,000 for the handgun, easy to conceal and reliable. Han Feng humbly rejected it as he was thinking more along the lines of something a little longer and bigger. He was not looking for some low-caliber pea shooter. He wanted something that requires a scope to fire. Boss Lu's expression turned grave as he stared at Han Feng intently. Our boy might have crossed the line unknowingly. He immediately shut up as if he just swallowed his tongue. The big guy started yelling about how unrealistic it is to demand a freaking sniper rifle like it was nothing. He's running a discreet business here. This is not some goddamn shopping mall where you get to pick and choose what kind of illegal product you get. Boss Lu's final offer is the pistol on the table. Take it or leave it. Brother Lee had to run some interference to try to calm the boss down. His idea of convincing the big guy to listen was to invent a backstory for Han Feng on his own. A made-up story that allegedly happened 5 years ago involving Han Feng's non-existent wife. Lee is quite a mouthy but talented storyteller. Under the relentless downfall of snow, the boss listened to his lies all the way to the end. The story must have been phenomenal, as Boss Lu was so angered that he almost snapped the table in half. He kept repeating how disgusting those who had wronged Han Feng were. Apparently, Han Feng had 3 kids with a non-existent wife, but it turned out that none of them were his. Han Feng just stood there and went with all the lies. Even for someone nicknamed Homeless Joe, this ridiculous story was too over the top, but it worked. Boss Liu gave his personal guarantee that Han Feng would get his sniper rifle as soon as possible. He promised that he would personally make it happen, but it might take a few days. Once again, the henchman Xiangzi will be arranging everything. Boss Liu wanted something semi-automatic with loads of ammo too, so Han Feng could have what he needed. It's unexpected, but Brother Lee definitely came in clutch. The big guy also handed Han Feng the handgun. He wanted to give it for free. A gift from one man to another. Han Feng was speechless. The made-up story was so good that the boss had formed some kind of one-sided bond with him. Now that it was taken care of, the big guy got back on his phone to take care of his other, more pressing businesses. Before leaving, Han Feng wanted to return the favor a little bit. He stated that a buddy of his who works for the government had told him that due to the abnormal weather, purchase limits for supplies will be implemented soon, so it's best to stock up before that happens. Seeing the serious look in the young man's eyes, as if he actually knew what he was talking about, Boss Lu could not help but take the tip seriously too. He nodded in understanding and remarked that he got it. And so, Brother Lee and Han Feng exited the center of the city's underbelly with one firearm secured. On the way back, Lee could not stop bragging about how he handled business like a boss, and it went beautifully. Now that his big brother, the big boss, is in a good mood, they could even ask that guy for a cannon, and he'd say yes. Han Feng wanted to thank the thug by buying him some cigarettes. Brother Lee tried to be humble and insisted that he did what he did just to help him, but he would gladly take about 7 to 8 cartons of his beloved Huazi cigs. He even promised to take Han Feng to a sauna once he got paid for his so-called project. Our boy was already thinking about his next logical move. Supplies are secured and the weapon is obtained. He should be set for the early days of the apocalypse, at the very least. He can focus on studying his abilities. Fully solving the food problem would make his long-term survival chances skyrocket. He was so absorbed in his own world while walking that he didn't notice an icy part on the ground and slipped. Han Feng was so concerned with survival that he failed to follow one of the ironclad rules in the upcoming ice age. Do not get injured. He fell quite badly. His leg must have absorbed the impact of the slip and had been damaged severely. Brother Lee didn't know what to do as he ran towards his new pal's side. This is bad. From the sharp pain he was feeling and the awkward landing, there was a very real possibility that his leg was broken. He shakily took his car keys out, handed them over to Brother Lee, and requested to be taken to the nearest hospital as soon as possible. Lee just scratched the back of his head and admitted that he actually doesn't have a driver's license, insisting that he can't drive without one. But it's safe to say that this bum just can't drive, period. At least he didn't leave Han Feng on the floor to writhe in the pain of a broken leg. He offered his shoulders to lift Han Feng up, but he struggled hard to do so. Both of them wouldn't make it to the hospital alive at this rate, so Han Feng just called a taxi that he had to pay for since Lee is a broke bastard. Even the hospital, an essential establishment, was starting to freeze over under the intensifying blizzard. In the nurse's office, someone named Jian was left to take care of the night shift on this whiteout night. The snow was getting heavier, and the roads were starting to get buried deep. Head nurse Jian had only just started her night shift, but calls coming from the hall were already flooding in as the emergency section was severely short-staffed. The pretty nurse had no other choice but to step up. Upon getting an x-ray in the hospital, it was confirmed that he had really broken his leg. The doctor explained that there was a stable fracture on his right tibia. It would be easy to set, but he'd need to stay for an hour of observation before going home with his meds. This accident could not have happened at a worse time. It just had to occur before the apocalypse went into full swing. While looking at his X-ray results, Han Feng regretted being so careless. Brother Lee accompanied him for most of the process, but the dude had to leave as he apparently had a few deals to handle. He's a real one though, and he even left his number in case Han Feng needed anything else. Now that he was alone in the hospital lobby, Han Feng sighed heavily. He wondered how he could make such a stupid mistake at such a crucial time. Looking at the chaos around him was stressful. The hospital quickly overflowed with patients, victims of accidents caused by the sudden blizzard and quickly plummeting temperatures. Emergency beds lined the hallways as a grim testament to the worsening conditions outside. As for him personally, he just wanted to get his meds and leave this place as fast as possible before the roads closed for good. Thankfully, his idle time would not be boring as a goddess had just walked right in front of him. Head nurse Jian had come to bolster the understaffed emergency room. The first bed she checked had a patient with heavy wounds. Next on her rotation was bed 5, where a patient's wounds had just been cleaned. Thankfully, the vitals were stable. Bed 5 just needed another dose of glucose in 10 minutes. She advised the attending nurse that if the patient's heart rate dropped below 80, epinephrine must be administered immediately. Throughout the rounds of the head nurse, Han Feng could not take his eyes off her. She was just amazing. Being a head nurse at such a young age, she must be a generational talent. On top of that, he saw how she dealt with all kinds of patients. She was kind and incredibly skilled. She looked like a radiant being in the middle of a hopeless place. Moreover, she was incredibly beautiful. She was working the hectic night shift, but her smile never faltered. She was basically an angel. He was so enamored that his eyes accidentally traveled to some ungentlemanly areas. Han Feng immediately averted his gaze out of respect. But head nurse Jian was just way too unaware of her surroundings. A real airhead. Suddenly, the old man sitting beside him started calling the attention of the pretty head nurse. She was not really required to tend to the patients outside of her rounds, but she still took the call with a smile. Head nurse Jian politely apologized to the old man and asked if she could come back a bit later to help, as she still needed to provide urgent care to some patients to cover for the staff shortage. The old man complained that his back hurt too much. He explained that the back pain had been worsening lately and wanted the head nurse to take a look to see what was causing it. In reality, this bastard was just a dirty perv trying to film below her skirt. Not noticing what was really happening, Jian just smiled and apologized once again, saying that for such back problems, they might need to schedule an X-ray just to be sure. The old perv started getting pushy, urging her to just take a quick look as he pointed to where it hurt. The bastard even got up from his seat to touch the angelic nurse inappropriately. Being the airhead that she usually was, Jian just laughed as she was naturally ticklish. For back problems, it's really advisable to wait for the resident physician's exam. The perv started pushing it, his hand crawling even lower from her waist. This disgusting act would have continued longer if something or someone had not made it stop. A freaking flying crutch forcefully smashed against the old perv, giving him some real back pain and knocking the phone away from his hands. Ever the kind-hearted healthcare worker, Jian wanted to check if the old man was all right. Thankfully, Han Feng came to her rescue, humbly apologizing for his crutch flying to the side as this was the first time he was using one. He bent over and went straight for the old perv's phone while blatantly questioning if it was broken or not. Just as he was about to touch it, the perv started sweating nervously and screaming at him to stay away from the phone. Han Feng did not listen. He walked all the way to the side of the room, got his bandage all messed up, and wouldn't let this freaking lecher get away with doing something so disgusting. As soon as he opened the phone, his suspicions were proven right. He looked at the creep directly in the eyes. If looks could kill, the geezer would have died by now. The proof was already there on the home screen. This perv had some nerve filming up a hard-working nurse's skirt and even assaulting her. There's no good reason why Han Feng shouldn't call security and have them escort the bastard to a jail cell where criminals love putting pervs in their place. Han Feng would be keeping the phone, and the next time he saw this old creep again, he threatened to ruin his miserable and revolting life. The old bastard knew he had no other choice but to flee and never show himself near this place again, and it infuriated him. The first chance he got up from that hospital floor and bolted out of the door like his life depended on it. Meanwhile, head nurse Jian was just confused as to how someone complaining about severe back pain could run so fast. Han Feng was shocked to see a first-hand display of the most comically naive person he had ever met. He decided to show her what the old fart was doing with the phone, filming up her skirt. Based on her reaction, she really did not notice anything wrong going on. Han Feng handed her the phone with the video footage so she could decide whether to wipe it or call the cops on the owner. He also reminded her to be more careful, so people like that perv wouldn't take advantage of her kindness. She smiled with the brightness of 1,000 stars and then asked if Han Feng's leg was supposed to be injured. The adrenaline from catching that old perv in the act must have numbed the pain from his broken leg, but now that it was dealt with, the pain came rushing back in and he screamed in agony. Thankfully, head nurse Jian was an expert when it came to mending these types of injuries and quickly set the casting back in place. She looked at him and asked if it still hurt. Han Feng thanked her for dealing with his broken leg, and now it didn't hurt at all. At that moment, it was as if only the two of them existed in the crowded room. Jian returned the gratitude as she promised to never let such bad guys get away with messing with her anymore. She would punch them really well from now on. Han Feng just wanted her to be more aware of her surroundings. Seeing as she was letting his broken leg and feet touch her front pillows, it seemed like she had not learned anything at all. She was still as clueless and unaware as ever. While Han Feng's head was in the clouds, another nurse called for Jian as her help was needed on the emergency beds. Before going back to her rounds, the angelic head nurse reminded him not to forget to come back in a week to get his leg checked again. Han Feng promised that he would, but making any plans a week from now was unrealistic. He just smiled, helplessly, for only he knew what was really going on in the world. He took the crutch that he smashed against the old perv and limped his way out of the hospital. Han Feng just accepted the fact that he wouldn't be able to see her ever again. The next day came, and the blizzard had not stopped. It had gotten even stronger instead. It had essentially frozen all infrastructure and services, making just going outside a dangerous challenge. On the morning news, emergency weather reports kept coming in about how, within the next 24 hours, all regions of the country would be experiencing heavy snowfall and a sharp drop in temperatures. Bizarre reports from overseas correspondents showed that temperatures were plummeting in every corner of the world. Dubai, Egypt, the Amazon basin, and places that should not be experiencing this type of phenomenon were seeing their land masses buried in thick blankets of snow. The nation's experts, along with specialists from 46 other countries, were rushing to the United Nations to discuss the cause of the anomalous weather. Every network kept echoing that the experts said this severe cold snap wouldn't last too long. They always ended their news reports with a public service announcement to pay attention to disaster warnings and follow arrangements made by the local government. They kept reminding citizens to remain calm, avoid spreading or believing in unfounded rumors, and refrain from hoarding supplies and panic buying, as the disaster would soon pass. Warm, cozy, and sipping wine inside his decked-out home, Han Feng clicked his tongue. The government and media just kept lying through their teeth, feeding the public BS to maintain order. If he hadn't died and come back to life already, he might even believe them. But this time was different. He was well prepared for everything that was about to come. Supplies were fully stocked, the house was reinforced, and the heating system was working flawlessly. He had been so well prepared that there was nothing to worry about for the immediate future. His phone started buzzing incessantly with messages from the Happy Housing Complex residents group chat, discussing the weird weather and how the snow was already making the roads unusable. Everyone was clearly clueless about what was happening, but not the member nicknamed Mysterious Person. Whoever this was demanded everyone's attention to inform them that the snowstorm wasn't caused by normal weather patterns, but by something within the Earth itself. Mysterious Person proclaimed that everyone should heed his words as the Ice Age apocalypse was about to begin. No one was more shocked after reading those messages than Han Feng. Who the hell is this mysterious person, and how do they know anything about the apocalypse? I guess we'll only find out if you like and subscribe. After seeing the enigmatic messages from the mysterious person in the housing complex group chat, Han Feng made a mental note to be mindful of this guy. Meanwhile, the rest of the residents were complaining and demanding the property management team do something about the snow buildup. Most of them were starting to run out of supplies and were worried that the supermarkets would be emptied out. At this point in time, the Happy Housing Complex residents group chat was like an amusement park hinging on a very delicate balance. Most tenants were putting pressure on the property agents to get out and give them an explanation for why they couldn't restock essentials due to the inaccessibility of roads. The property management team was not even at fault here, but they still apologized for not being able to take any steps on account of the raging disaster. An admission of incapability made the tenants even more aggressive. Thinking that the management was useless, they demanded that the team refund their fees. Han Feng was in the middle of this heated discussion. He knew that this was a completely meaningless fight, as the snowstorm wasn't something humans could deal with. Thankfully, another person stood out from the crowd. His voice to stop the fighting pierced through the loud chaos. It was the glasses-wearing owner of Unit 611-1204. He explained that with the snowstorm being so heavy, clearing it out would be useless as it would build up again after a few hours. So, instead of fighting, maybe everyone could help clear it out. If they had done that, instead of bickering, they would have been able to go out long ago. He added that the property management team was just humans. They were also helpless in front of an abnormal natural disaster. He asked the tenants if they were just looking for someone to take their frustrations out on. The angry mob immediately turned on him for lecturing them about decency. They even accused the Glasses guy of being one of the useless members of the property management team. Glasses cleared up that he was not speaking on behalf of the property management team. He was just speaking objectively and realistically. Pushing management into a corner would be meaningless and would only prolong the problem. It wouldn't get them the result everyone desired. Now that he put it like that, the people turned to Glasses for the next move. He asserted that with the current conditions, driving a car to the supermarket would be impossible. Even if they cleared the neighborhood snow, the main roads outside might be unusable. He suggested clearing footpaths and walking over for supply runs. Han Feng couldn't quite put a finger on it, but he seemed to have some recollection of this Glasses guy, owner Zhang. In the previous life, he was a very lively person. You could see his charisma working on the group chat. Some of the tenants agreed with Zhang's suggestions, thinking that they shouldn't complicate the matter. Those who wanted to go out should clear the roads. Those who didn't should just shut up. Fighting and acting immaturely in the chat for half a day just to clear some snow was very annoying. Once everyone realized that what they were doing was cringe, the GC finally quieted down. Another person stepped up to volunteer in the clearing operation. He said he needed to hit the roads to go to his brother to discuss business worth a few million. Han Feng might not have seen a profile picture or a voice message, but that guy's manner of speaking seemed very similar to that of some gangster he knew. As soon as the first volunteer stepped up, more and more people raised their hands to join the operation, as most of them were running out of food. There was even a dazzling young lady who would brave the snowstorm, even though she was a little weaker than an average person. As for that witch, Lee Hyona claimed that she had the flu over the past 2 days, but she would still love to go down and help with the neighborhood. Han Feng was unimpressed, to say the least. He might be the only one who could see through the good girl act. Most of the men in this neighborhood knew her and would fawn over her. Some white knight immediately butted in and insisted on volunteering for her sake. When a decent amount of her fans stepped up to the plate, she thanked them for going through the trouble of cleaning up a footpath. Tired of this BS, Han Feng got out of that group chat with annoyance. But he had to admit that when it came to putting on an act, Hyun was really an expert. With just a few taps of a button, she could manipulate multiple men to do her bidding. As for Han Feng, Lee Hyuna was using a little more personal touch. She had been bugging him to chat. Ultimately, she just wanted him to get her some food from the supermarket if he was going. She really was a master of her craft. Her innocent request was accompanied by a cute photo in her bed. She even had her feet in the frame for all the freaks out there. Han Feng was actually very impressed with the commitment. In these catastrophic weather conditions, the witch was still wearing so little to try and seduce him. She could really turn a lot of men into errand boys with that. Now was the fun part. Han Feng could reply to her advances however he wanted. Well, whatever he sent back must have been some awful crap, as Lee Hyuna tossed her phone and stepped on it hard in anger and annoyance as soon as she saw it. Today would make it the 3rd official day since the snowfall started. The temperature had reached -20. This could be regarded as the early stage of the apocalypse, a time when most buildings of decent quality still had central heating systems running. They still had the internet, and everyone was still going on with their daily lives as usual. They just needed to stay inside, just like COVID times. Han Feng had been scrolling through videos and TikToks to pass his time as well. Based on his page, it looked like we had a certified man of culture. It had only been a few days, and he was already getting bored with the mindless indoor activities. It looked like his most significant problem in this apocalypse would be learning how to endure loneliness. It also didn't help that his leg was a broken mess. A broken bone would need at least a few months to completely recover. Just like us, Han Feng's boredom always led back to watching videos on the internet. He came across a gruesome broadcast in the scientific column about a man who got into a brutal accident. After doctors sewed up the man who jumped from the 15th floor, they discovered that his damaged internal organs and bones started regenerating. This clickbait news story gave Han Feng an idea. It's one that he really should have come up with a lot earlier. Why had he not thought of using his newfound powers on himself? He activated the green light in his right hand and carefully touched his broken leg with it. After a few seconds of nothing happening, the green light started dissipating. Han Feng refused to believe that it was a bust, so he tried again. He activated the green light harder than he did before, but just like earlier, the light eventually died down with no change in his leg. It looked like he was just overthinking things. He really thought that the green light would be able to help his injury recover faster, but it seemed like the only thing it brought was irresistible sleepiness. Han Feng eventually succumbed to the heaviness of his eyes and took a nap on the couch. He woke up to some freaky-ass ceremony that involved goats and Native American headdresses. Under the transcendent light of the night skies, Han Feng rode on the back of giant goats with a bloody whip in his hands. Goat heads flew alongside him. In this freaky ceremony, Han Feng is riding at the forefront of a goat herd on top of a bloody red grassland. There are totem poles scattered along the land, and he is having fun whipping his whip all around the place. Well, that fun only lasts for a minute before he is tossed off the goat's back and into the herd. He eventually lands on the blood-red grassland, and he lands badly. His foot is at an awkward angle and a crack can be heard. It makes him shiver in pain. To come from the absolute freedom of riding goats in the grassland to being immobile on the ground is quite jarring. To make matters worse, one of the goats starts licking his broken leg. Disgusted, Han Feng tries his hardest to shoo the goat away from him and his unfortunate injury. He pushes the goat over and over again until the animal finally snaps. It extends its tongue like a frog, wrapping that slimy piece around his affected leg. Then the goat raises its head, and Han Feng's whole body comes along helplessly. While feeling the slimy saliva running down his leg, he also starts feeling the warmth of the green light wrapping around his injury. Han Feng eventually wakes up from that bizarre nightmare that involves a lot of goats. He is sweating and screaming. The dream is just too immersive. While he labors to catch his breath, he wonders just what caused that hideously messy dream. Well, the answer presents itself quite loudly. His broken right leg still has some leftover green light aura surrounding it. Furthermore, Han Feng senses a certain lightness in his limbs. He promptly takes off the bandage wrapping around his injury and tosses it to the side. Han Feng excitedly steps on the floor and carefully puts more weight on his right leg. He is pleased and surprised to confirm that the injury does not hurt anymore. He is fully healed for some reason. This should mean that the green light could also help with self-recovery, right? But could the healing process only take place while he's sleeping? There is only one way to find out, and that's by trying it out again in a localized body part. He shakily takes the sharpest kitchen knife he has and slowly puts it up against his other hand. Stealing his resolve, Han Feng cannot even watch while the blade's edge touches his flesh. He only needs a little prick, but the wound he makes on his fingertip flows quite freely with blood. Not wasting another second with a bleeding wound, Han Feng calls upon the green light to do its thing. Upon seeing the healing process up close and personal, Han Feng smiles to himself. He understands now. He has a real survival game-changer in his hands. Outside the building, those who volunteered to clear up a footpath diligently worked together for the good of the community. Glasses guy. Thanks everyone for participating in this difficult manual work. This Mr. Perfect even singles out the oldest of the bunch, Uncle Liu, and politely apologizes for all the trouble. Jiang Shuiyu really knows what to say in any situation. Uncle Liu Guangyao just laughs and insists that he didn't do much as most of the actual work was done thanks to the Jin brothers. Those two, Jin Qinwen and Jin Qinwu, really went all out for the clearing operation. Some real hard workers. While they are busy finishing up the final touches, a young lady wearing a thick pink coat slips on the ice. The Jin brothers immediately rush toward the lady to check if she's okay, and remind her to be more careful. This pink girlie is known as Jin Jian. She's a real doer, unlike that witch Li Hyuna, who didn't even leave her room after playing sick. The Jin brothers still have a lot to do, so they just remind Jin Jian to call for them if she needs help. She assures them that she'll be fine. Well, the snow is getting heavier. Those who are planning to buy some supplies later will have to move quickly. Speaking of supplies, Uncle Liu is reminded of something that he noticed a few weeks ago. Uncle Liu stops himself from babbling, thinking that what he has to say wouldn't be anything significant, but Jiang Shuiyu curiously presses him on. The old man has been hearing that for the past few days or weeks, an owner in the neighborhood has been bringing back supplies on a small truck, like he's moving houses. Jiang Shuiyu thinks that this is a common sight, as there are always people moving into the neighborhood and houses undergoing renovations. But Uncle Liu got different vibes from this one. He saw gas tanks and a whole fireplace being shipped in. It's not normal for someone to move in or anything like that. It's just a hunch, but Uncle Liu thinks that the person was making preparations to get through a harsh winter. This conversation is interrupted by the Jin brothers, who have just finished clearing the main path. People should be able to go out now. Uncle Liu promptly thanked them for going all out. But unbeknownst to everyone, there's another tenant listening in from earlier. He heard talks about making preparations for the winter, and his morbid interest has been piqued. This weirdo is quickly neutralized by a snowball landing on the back of his head. Wu Kuan-yu is brought down a peg by this gorgeous woman, Liu Yan. The weirdo tries to argue that he's been doing everything alone since earlier, and she's just been watching from the side. But Liu Yan just dismisses him as an unruly child. Jiang Shuiyu breaks up the fight between the two and informs them that the main path has been cleared and is now good to go. This means that the volunteers can stop shoveling and get ready to head out to the supermarket for supplies instead. Looking at their shopping list, it seems like the Jin brothers have a lot to buy. They even want to buy some for their mom, thinking that she's going to need it. These two are good sons. For someone who didn't want to share the story earlier, Uncle Liu seems way too curious about Jiang Shuiyu's thoughts on the matter of that tenant who brought in a ton of supplies. Truthfully speaking, Jiang Shuiyu doesn't feel too concerned about hearsay. He still believes what the government and the authorities say, that this is just a brief snowstorm that will stop very soon. They only need to endure for a bit. Then they can return to normal. So, He's not too worried about those mysterious deliveries. But even if they step back and assume that this snowstorm is here to stay, if someone in the neighborhood is hoarding a massive stockpile of resources, isn't that a good thing for everyone? Uncle Liu immediately understands what Zhang Xueyu is implying. He praises the young one for being brainy. Under the ruthless snowfall with no signs of stopping, Zhang Xueyu leads some of the tenants to the supermarket. He makes sure that everyone queues up properly. With the snow getting heavier, they need to try and get back within 3 hours. If they get past the 3-hour mark, who knows if they'll even have a road to walk back on. While those brave souls enter the unknown and endure the harsh environment, Han Feng is passed out in his warm and cozy living room, drooling on himself. He would have stayed holed up on this couch forever with all the soda and junk food to tide him over the dull day, if not for the annoying voice calling him to the door. Han Feng lazily opens his door. He wipes the sleep from his eyes and sees homeless Joe. I mean Brother Lee. Well, the smooth-talking gangster has come in clutch once again. Hidden inside a big bag is a semi-automatic rifle complete with a proper crosshair. It's precisely what Han Feng wanted. This was the promised gift from Boss Liu. Brother Lee had agreed to bring it because he had stocked up on supplies beforehand and could now afford not to run around the city like crazy looking for supplies like most of the other citizens. But even so, Han Feng was grateful to him for coming in this weather. Brother Lee also had some very interesting information that various rumors had already started to spread about. Last night, some unknown person had cleaned out the shelves of a supermarket in the Eastern District. And when the Boss Liu gang cleared their way out of the snow yesterday, they were met with nothing but emptiness in the supermarket. To Han Feng, something like this seemed unbelievable, to completely clean out a huge supermarket in one night. Who could be capable of such a thing? However, there was no doubt in Brother Lee's words, and it had definitely happened. Han Feng was now beginning to realize that something even stranger than in his previous life was happening around him. It looked like he wasn't the only one who had gained superpowers. For a second, his thoughts were interrupted by Brother Lee. He advised Han Feng to wear more warm clothes and be careful. After that, he said goodbye and left. Finally, our hero could be alone and think things over. He kept trying to think of a logical explanation for what had happened last night. How could someone clean out a supermarket in one night? The only explanation he could think of was the theory that it could have been done by someone with superpowers from novels and comic books. Someone capable of hiding unlimited amounts of supplies in his personal subspace. The only question was, could people with such abilities exist in this world? And the answer to that question was quite simple. Since he himself had superpowers, someone else could too. This was a disturbing discovery. Now Han Feng couldn't waste a moment. He needed to examine his superpowers more thoroughly, so that when he encountered other superpower holders, he would have his own strategy to counter them. He simply had to know his strengths and weaknesses, as well as the limit of his superpowers. To do so, he opened his diary, and began to study the already known facts about his powers. At this point, he already knew that his power could react with different foods, both plant and animal. With its help, he could quickly grow them, increase their volume, and also fry them, though with a terrible taste. But still. Unfortunately, there were limitations, which he learned about later. The likelihood of success of power application is not that great and differs for different products. For example, for soybeans, the chance of growing a plant is 10%. For meat, it's even less. Han Feng kept failing to understand why things worked the way they did. Suddenly, the soybean under the influence of the force exploded in his hand with an unpleasant green cloud. And instead of a normal plant, our hero had a rock in his hand. Just a stinky rock. This was starting to annoy him. The failure rate was too high. Han Feng had to learn how to use his power more effectively. And he was determined to start practicing hard. After all, nothing helps you learn any skill faster than practice. For this purpose, he spared no time and worked hard until late in the evening. Finally, he succeeded. In his hands, Han Feng had a fresh and alive soybean plant with pods. Such an achievement did not come easy to him. He was sweating profusely and was already quite a good heater for his apartment. But that was the price he had to pay to figure out a few rules to increase the success rate. He found out that green light energy is not constant. And for different products, it is worth applying this green light for different lengths of time, depending on the nutritional value of the product. If you do not guess the duration of application, you will end up with a failure and get a burnt, stinky stone. That is, you need to know exactly the ideal cooking interval for each product. This brings to mind Han Feng. Something familiar. One popular music and dance online game that came out a decade ago, where you had to press the right buttons in rhythm at the right interval. It was also conceivable that the value of energy could be compared to the directions, up, down, right, and left. And the value of the energy input to the object had to be correct every second. And eventually a critical point had to be caught, and the process had to be stopped. If you do it right, you'll achieve success, and every soybean will become a plant. After the success with plants, Han Feng began experimenting with meat. obviously, but meat was different from vegetables. If you did something wrong in the process, the meat would then turn into a disgusting black slurry. However, the principles in turning meat were still supposed to be similar. The first place to start was to determine how much energy the meat needed. Everything seemed to be working and going according to plan. But here's the problem. The chicken leg exploded just like the previous ones with a nasty black slurry. It looked like it would take him even longer to learn how to work with meat than with plant food. Time after time, Han Feng tried and failed. The chicken legs exploded one after another. There seemed to be no end to this series of failures. Finally, our hero's patience ran out. He even cried out in despair, cursing this damn ability with an increased level of difficulty. However, the hero was not one to give up, and while the snowfall outside the window only intensified and the temperature dropped even lower, Han Feng did not stop trying. Traces of it were all over the kitchen. And then came the moment of truth. The last chicken leg. Our hero was already doing everything on automatic with an absent expression on his face and did not even hope for success. Up and down, left and right, red and green energy. It felt like an overly complicated mini-scale game to him. It was repeated one after another, and as soon as he made a mistake, he had to start all over again. The tension was at an all-time high, and this time Han Feng succeeded. He managed to grow the chicken leg to a gigantic size. With a snort of disdain, our hero said that it was worth it, and collapsed exhausted but happy on the floor. He had finally found a way to synthesize meat. The weather outside was getting worse by the day. The news announced that today, July 17th, was the third consecutive day of snow disaster. In every corner of the country, the same thing is happening, and it seems that mankind is facing a disaster that happens only once in a few thousand years. In order to ensure the basic livelihood of citizens, the authorities are actively fighting the consequences and taking measures to help citizens. It was to such news that Han Feng woke up the next day. How many times had he heard it before? Empty warnings and promises about how the heavy snowfall had paralyzed transportation, electricity, and internet. But everything would be repaired soon, and all they needed to do was wait a little longer. Soon, humanitarian supplies should arrive in the disaster areas. Finally, the news anchor advised everyone to stay indoors and not to go outside unnecessarily. For Han Feng, there was nothing surprising in all of this. He had heard all of this in his past life. Suddenly, a notification came on his phone, followed instantly by several more. Han Feng immediately saw that it was a group of residents of his house who had started making noise again, and he simply couldn't help but join in the discussion. The noise around was unbelievable. Everyone was discussing the morning news. Some believed that the rescuers would come and help them. Others thought it was all empty promises and made plans to save themselves. Only one avatar stood out from the crowd and asked the gullible if they really believed what was being said on the news. It was old Uncle Liu, and he absolutely did not believe what was being said on TV. If everything was under the control of the government, the rescue teams would have arrived long ago. Instead, he had heard rumors from old friends that the government was assembling armored vehicles, tanks, and other heavy weapons in City A, the capital of the country. They are probably preparing for the war that is about to break out.